Hello! Today we're reading the best Reddit stories and most top voted posts of all time. From r/AskReddit, what is the laziest thing you've ever done? This was a very short story from the comments, but the brilliance on display was a memorial. Today we're reading Ops Officer Zombie with a Bagel. Late to the party, but this one is too good to pass up. I was once on a US military ship having breakfast in the wardroom or officers' lounge when the operations officer, Ops, walks in. This guy was the definition of not a morning person. He's still half asleep, bleary eyed, basically a zombie with a bagel. He sits down across from me to eat his bagel and is just barely conscious. My back is to the outboard side of the ship, and the morning sun is blazing in one of the portholes, putting a big bright circle of light right on his barely conscious face. He's squinting and chewing and basically just remembering how to be alive for today. It's painful to watch. But then, Zombie Op stops chewing, slowly picks up the phone, and dials the bridge. In his well known, I'm still totally asleep voice, he says, "Hey, it's Ops. Could you shift our bar pat? Yeah, 165, thanks," and puts the phone down. And then he just sits there, squinting, waiting. And then, ever so slowly, I realize that big, blazing spot of sun has begun to slide off the zombie's face and onto the wall behind him. After a moment, it clears his face and he blinks slowly a few times, and the brilliant beauty of what I've just witnessed begins to overwhelm me. By ordering the bridge to adjust the ship's back and forth patrol by about 15 degrees, he's changed our course just enough to reposition the sun off of his face. He's literally just redirected thousands of tons of steel and hundreds of people so that he could get the sun out of his eyes while he eats his bagel. I am in awe. He slowly picks up his bagel, and for a moment, I'm terrified at the thought that his own genius may escape him, that he may never appreciate the epic brilliance of his laziness, since he's not going to wake up for another hour. But between his next bites, he pauses, looks at me, and gives me the faintest sly grin before returning to gnaw slowly on his zombie bagel. Have you ever seen those YouTube videos of amazing construction workers who are so good at their craft that they appear to be doing magic? That's what I have in mind when I picture this, but even more impressive because their tool is a warship. There was an answered question and similar anecdote in the comments. Someone asked what BARPAT means, as Rubber said, barrier patrol, or steaming back and forth across a specific area, probably with other ships patrolling adjacent areas, forming a barrier. Gravel Pit had this to share. I sent this comment to my father about 5 years from retiring from the Navy, and this was his reply. Actually, yes, I have done almost exactly that. But instead of moving the sun, we were sailing back across the Atlantic, and the course we were on was causing interference with the satellite TV while a football game was on, because the satellite receivers was blocked by the mast. So I called and had them change course by about 15 degrees. Typical sailors. And now for a wilder classic from another comment section. Our story comes when Javert asked, "In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest, or most unsettling experience of your life?" In the comments, the comment reactor gave a fairly spooky story, some twists and turns you'll never expect. It has become known as the painting. Say what you will, here's what happened. When I was in college, I lived with roommates in a 5-bedroom house just outside the city. The house was built before any of the surrounding neighborhood existed, and as such, it sat sideways on our street. The right side had a fancy porch and front door. It was a duplex, and that side of the house was owned by a guy who lived alone. He made a lot of money in whatever it was that he did for a living, and clearly traveled a lot as he was rarely home. Our side was obviously once the back of the house. Obviously, the house had been split down the middle sometime after it had been built, and you could tell. A staircase was squeezed in randomly in the back hallway. The basement door had just been walled off, stuff like that. There were big gaps between the wall and the floor in some places, and in one of them, you could even see several scraps of paper with barely legible writing on them. It was a quirky house, but we were a quirky group. mostly art students attending the several art schools in our city. We constantly had people graduating and moving back home, so the rooms changed hands quite a few times. The walls were decorated with paintings and sculptures from both roommates and friends. One particular painting always seemed to catch people's attention, even though it didn't necessarily stand out much. One of the original roommates had painted it. It was based on a bust that she had seen somewhere of an old woman, and she had painted it as if it were a person, giving it skin tone and texture. I had joked about the painting ever since I first saw it, how it just creeped me out from the moment I saw it. My bedroom was the only one on the first floor, and the painting sat at the top of the stairs. This meant I had to walk right by it to go to the bathroom. It bothered me, but not enough to do anything about it at first. Eventually, it got to be too much. Late at night, when the house was dark and quiet, I couldn't even stand to walk by it. I would go out of my way to use the back stairs to the bathroom, or in very desperate moments, I would even go outside. Eventually, I went to my roommate in confidence, not sure how to approach the situation. I told her that I loved her art, and even this painting was technically impressive. It just affected me somewhere deep down, and I could no longer deal with it. She was very understanding, and we rotated the artwork in the house so that this painting was now in the living room. Here's where I lose people. I think this upset the painting. It was almost instantly that weird stuff started happening. My roommates and I would talk about how uneasy we felt in the house sometimes, like there might be some kind of presence there. It started as joking, but as time went on, we all started to take it more seriously. Our first summer in the house came around, and some of us went back with our families and sublet our rooms. I stayed behind as I had nowhere to really go at the time. One of the rooms on the top floor went to a girl that we found on Craigslist. The roommate, M, who contacted her, had admittedly never lived for an extended period of time with people that she liked, so she always sublet her rooms this way. The subletter K was odd from the get go. I met her one night when I came home from work. She was just hanging out in the living room with M, talking about whatever. M had an exasperated look on her face and asked me if I would go to the store with her. Kay came along with us, tried to get some ice cream but couldn't pay, so I paid for her. We walked back to the house, and Kay decided to head home, got on her bike, and left. M breathed a huge sigh of relief, and then told me that Kay had only come by for a quick tour but stayed for 8 hours. She just wouldn't take the hint to leave, and since she didn't technically live there, M hadn't wanted to leave her alone. So she's awkward, I thought, and brushed it off. Kay came back about a week later to give us a check and stayed for 6 hours this time. Again, no one was really sure what to do. A few weeks after that, Kay moved in. She kept to herself mostly, but all of our interactions with her were deeply insane. She carried around a blonde wig at all times. I never saw her wear it. She just always had it. She insisted on keeping a mini fridge in the bathroom for her cooking ingredients, claiming that the fridge in the kitchen overwhelmed her. She had a hammock that she strung up on the side of the house and would sleep out there more often than inside. All of her possessions were in a trunk that sat in the living room, and I eventually caught her trying to coax out a mouse that had been living in this trunk. She often came home with different guys who worked at the shops and restaurants right there in the neighborhood. One time, I came home to see her sprawled out asleep on the porch in front of the door, her wig tightly in hand. When I got curious one day and looked in the fridge and found a bag of dead cicadas, and wouldn't you know it, she was obsessed with this painting. She would talk about it all the time. So she was weird, overbearingly weird. It came together a little bit for me when I found a pill bottle of hers, now being used for spices, and being the nosy jerk that I am, I Googled the medication. I can't for the life of me remember what it was, but it was some heavy duty antipsychotic meds. One day, M came back to visit. She told me she had been in Kay's room and found, stapled to the ceiling, a collection of used condoms. M came back one day with all of her stuff to move back in, and Kay flipped out. They had allegedly agreed that the sublease was over on this day, but Kay insisted that it wasn't. After a big argument, Kay decided that she would stay out in her hammock for the remainder of her time there. A few days later, I came home from work and found my roommates and several friends sitting around wide-eyed. Apparently, while I was gone, Kay had come home with a much older gentleman. locked herself in the bathroom with him, and had loud sex for a long, long time. She came out and told everyone present that she had gotten her revenge for kicking her out. We discovered that this revenge involved taking all of her used condoms and emptying the contents all over the bathroom. She then began crying uncontrollably and left the house, and we never saw her again. That doesn't mean she wasn't still around. Her stuff mysteriously disappeared one day, and no one had seen her come back for it. Even more troubling, the keys to the basement had gone missing. We worked up the balls to go down there and looked around, but found no trace of her. It didn't matter. As long as she had those keys, she could get in and out whenever she wanted. And we would all occasionally swear we heard voices down there. Before K, the house was a little creepy. After K, the house became downright disturbing, and all of it centered around this painting. One night, I was in the living room with a few friends, smoking joints and what have you. No one else was home. I was telling them about Kay and about how creepy the house was in general. As soon as I got to the part about the painting, almost on cue, the painting flew off the wall. It didn't fall, it flew and landed all the way across the room. We looked at each other shocked and booked it out of there and down the street. We walked around for a bit, but it was my house and I eventually had to go back. Another time, again, while no one was home and again involving green stuff, a friend and I left a fresh bowl packed and ready to go on the coffee table while we stepped outside to do something else. We returned minutes later to find the bowl smoked to completion. On multiple occasions, I walked into the living room to find the painting upside down. I would get furious about this, thinking my roommates were messing with me, but with how angry I was and how I talked to them about it, I could see it in their eyes that nobody was responsible. Our neighbors had a cat who would just waltz into our house like he owned it, and we thought it was kind of funny, so we would let him. He was a good cat, so it wasn't really a problem. One night, I was walking through the living room with the lights off, and I heard the cat make a noise. I didn't know he was in the house, and we didn't keep food around, so I wanted to let him out. I turned on the light and looked over in the corner where I heard the noise. The gosh dang painting was sitting there, leaning against the wall. That was the last fracking straw, and I insisted that my roommate bring it back to her studio. All at once, everything stopped. No more unsettling feelings in the house, no more voices in the basement, nothing. What I learned from this experience is this: no one, obviously, wants to live out a horror movie. At least when you're in your own horror movie, you eventually get some kind of explanation for the haunting or whatever is going down. What's even more terrifying is being the roommate in the horror movie. I never had any explanation. What the bananas was up with Kay? What's the deal with the painting? I don't know. And at this point, 2 years later, I don't give a hoot. Whew, this story was all over the place, but every stop was something interesting. I don't even know where to start. The creepy painting? The roommate or subletter? The gross condoms? I've never even heard of anyone doing something like that. I don't think I could handle being in a horror movie in my own life. Nope, definitely not. I'd have moved out the moment that painting twitched. Speaking of, there was an anecdote about another painting that got to me even more. Check this out. 1434 Life shared this. Right at the part where you say, "This is where I lose people," is where you had me. After a friend of mine died, motorcycle accident, his family moved to a new house in another city. His father set up one of his paintings on an easel at the bottom of the basement stairs. I thought it was a strange place for it, but never said anything because his other works were placed more prominently throughout the house. I lived there for a time, and at one point, the painting had to be temporarily stored in a closet, as we were moving furniture and other items about the house. The light in that closet turned on its own, every night until that painting was put back at the bottom of the stairs on the easel. My story was not at all creepy like yours, and I'm glad things got better for you after the painting was gone. Final comment is, haha, lol, great story, but I can't help but feel OP is a bit overly paranoid. Perhaps it's all the drugs he references. And now for the main event. Today I effed up by enraging the parents of my girlfriend by pretending not to know what a potato is. Let me tell you that I have made a bad mistake this evening. My girlfriend, who let me tell you is only my second girlfriend of all time, said I am invited to dinner with her and her parents. I was very aghast, nervous, and bashful to be invited to such a situation. but I knew it must be done. I met them nicely, I should tell you, and it started off in a good way. The idea slapped my mind that I should do a comic bit to make a good impression and become known to them as a person who was amusing. When I saw that baked potatoes were served, I got the idea that it would be very good if I pretended I did not know what potatoes were. That would be funny. Well, let me tell you, backfired on my face. I'll tell you how. So, first, when the potato became on my plate, I acted very interesting. I showed an expression on my face so as to seem that I was confused, astounded, but in a restrained way, curious and interested. They did notice and seemed confused, but did not remark. So I asked, "This looks very interesting. What is this?" They stared at me, and the mother said, "It's a baked potato." And I was saying, "Oh, interesting. A baked, what is it again?" And she was like, "A potato." And I was like, "A potato? Oh, interesting. Never heard of a potato. Looks pretty good." And then they didn't see I was clowning, but thought I really did not know what is a potato. So I knew I would be very shamed, humiliated, depressed, and disgusted if I admitted to making a bad joke. So what I did was to act as if it was not a joke, but I committed to the act of pretending I didn't know what a potato is. They asked me, very incredulous, did I really not know what a potato is? That I never heard of a potato? I went with it and told them yes, I did not ever even hear of a potato. Not only had I never eaten a potato, I had never heard the word potato. This went on for a bit, and my girlfriend was acting very confused and embarrassed by my effed up antics. And then the more insistent I was about not knowing what a potato is, was when the parents started thinking I did know what a potato was. Well, let me tell you, I had to commit 100% at this point. When I would not admit to knowing what a potato was, the father especially began to get annoyed. At one point, he said something like, "Enough is enough. You're effing with us. Admit it." And I said, "Sir, before today, I never heard of a potato. I still don't know what a potato is, other than some kind of food. I don't know what to tell you." Well, let me tell you, he got very annoyed. I decided to take a bite of the potato, and when I did, I made a high pitched noise and said, "Tastes very strange." That is when the father started yelling at me, and the mother kept saying, "What are you doing?" And my girlfriend went to some other room. Finally, the father said I should get the F out of his house, and I said it was irrational to treat me like this just because I never heard of a potato before. Well, let me tell you, he didn't take to that kindly. Now, in text messages, I have been telling my girlfriend I really don't know what a potato is. The only way I can ever get out of this is for them to buy that I don't know what a potato is. I wish I never started it, but I can't go back. I think she will break up with me anyway. I wrote out a funny commentary, but when I pulled the comments, it didn't even compete to these epic suggestions on what to do next for OP. The Fenestrator said, "You need to commit 100% to this now. Invent a religion, perhaps an obscure offshoot of Roman Catholicism formed after the Irish potato famine that eschews potatoes in all their forms. Create a Wikipedia page. Find a passage in the Bible that supports it. Literal interpretation of beasts of the field, perhaps. Maybe claim beasts is close to the old Irish word for potatoes. You are going to have to get creative. Reveal all of this to the girlfriend's family as though you just found out yourself. Tell them you went home and asked your parents about it, and they sat you down and told you that they were part of this religion and had raised you in observance of its tenets. You can then roll your eyes and act like your parents are the weirdest, most embarrassing people on earth for putting you in this situation. Oh, and they told you french fries were made from bread because it was the one indulgence they allowed. Never let your parents and her parents meet unless they have been briefed and can be trusted to dive on any grenades. Mingasai said, invite your girlfriend to meet your parents. Have your father take her aside and ask if potatoes were served at the dinner with her parents. When she says yes, he looks alarmed, mutters something about wanting to keep them from him, and never mentions the subject again. Wino T replied, that's if he still has a girlfriend. Furor of Feline said, send them a bouquet of potatoes as an apology. Drews232 replied, but on the card, write enjoy your potatoes. Potatoes in quotes, as if you still don't really believe they're real. If you've enjoyed the story and would like to hear more, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Thanks, and bye for now.